My name is David. I'm 34 years old, and on September 22nd, 2016, I died for 8 minutes during a sudden cardiac arrest at my office. I was reviewing quarterly reports when crushing chest pain dropped me to the floor. Everything went black as my heart stopped beating. What I experienced in those 8 minutes changed everything I thought I knew about life, death, and the power of unconditional love. The pain hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. One moment I was sitting at my desk, calculator in hand, reviewing the third quarter numbers that were due by 5 o'clock. The next moment, an invisible fist was crushing my ribcage from the inside. I remember the exact sensation because it felt like someone had reached through my sternum and was squeezing my heart with iron gloves. I tried to call out to my colleague Sarah in the next cubicle, but only a strangled gasp escaped my throat. The fluorescent lights above my desk suddenly seemed impossibly bright, flickering like strobes in a nightclub. My vision began to tunnel, and the familiar sounds of the office became muffled and distant, as if I were listening to them through thick cotton. My body betrayed me completely. My legs gave out first, and I felt myself sliding from my ergonomic office chair onto the industrial carpet below. The fall seemed to happen in slow motion, yet I was powerless to break it. My hands, which had been gripping the edge of my desk, suddenly felt like they belonged to someone else. They were cold, clammy, and trembling uncontrollably. The strangest part was the metallic taste that flooded my mouth. It was sharp and bitter, like I had been sucking on copper pennies. My breathing became shallow and rapid, each inhale feeling insufficient, as if the air around me had become too thin to sustain life. I could hear my heart beat in my ears, irregular and frantic, like a drummer who had lost all sense of rhythm. Then came the moment I will never forget as long as I live. I felt a peculiar sensation of lightness, as if gravity had suddenly released its hold on me. It started in my chest and spread outward through my limbs. Have you ever been in an elevator that drops too quickly? That moment when your stomach seems to float? It was like that, but magnified 1,000 times and spreading through every cell of my body. I became aware that I was no longer looking up at the ceiling tiles from the floor. Somehow, impossibly, I was hovering about 6 feet above my own body. I could see myself lying there on the grey carpet, my face pale and my lips already turning blue. My tie was askew, and my right arm was twisted at an awkward angle beneath me. Sarah was kneeling beside my motionless form, her face contorted with panic as she pressed her fingers against my neck, searching for a pulse that was no longer there. The scene below me felt like watching a movie of someone else's life. I tried to call down to Sarah to tell her I was fine, that I was right here floating above her, but no sound came from my mouth, because I no longer had a mouth to speak with. The realization should have terrified me, but instead I felt an overwhelming sense of calm and curiosity. Other co-workers began gathering around my body. I watched Jim from accounting rush in with the office defibrillator, his hands shaking as he tore open my shirt. I observed the controlled chaos with a detached fascination, noting details I never would have noticed from ground level. The coffee stain on Sarah's blouse, the way Jim's bald spot caught the overhead lighting, the expression of helpless concern on faces I saw every day but rarely really looked at. What struck me most profoundly was the silence where my thoughts used to be. Not an empty silence, but a peaceful, expectant quiet. like the moment before dawn when the whole world holds its breath. I was more aware than I had ever been in my physical body, yet completely free from the constant chatter of worry, planning, and judgment that normally filled my mind. The paramedics arrived with a rush of urgent voices and professional efficiency. I watched them work on my lifeless form with their machines and medications, fighting to restart the heart that I somehow knew had already carried me as far as it could in that particular body. As I watched the paramedics work frantically on my body below, I felt myself being drawn away from the scene. It wasn't a physical pulling, but rather like being called by a voice I couldn't hear, with ears I no longer possessed. The office around me began to fade, not into darkness, but into something I can only describe as the absence of everything familiar. The transition started gradually. The fluorescent lights dimmed until they became distant stars, then disappeared entirely. The walls of the office seemed to dissolve, like sugar in water, and the concerned faces of my co-workers became transparent, then vanished. I found myself moving through what I initially thought was empty space, but it was unlike any darkness I had ever experienced on Earth. This wasn't the darkness of a moonless night or a closed room. It was a complete absence of light that somehow didn't feel frightening. Think about the last time you were in total darkness. Remember how your other senses became heightened, how you strained to hear or feel your way forward. This was different. In this space, I had no need for physical senses because I was experiencing everything through a form of awareness I had never known existed. I became conscious that I was no longer bound by the laws of physics as I understood them. There was no up or down, no sense of direction in any conventional meaning. I moved through this void not by walking or flying, but by intention alone. When I focused on moving forward, whatever that meant in this dimensionless space, I found myself progressing through layers of what felt like different levels of existence. The silence here was profound beyond description. On Earth, even in the quietest moments, there are subtle sounds: your heartbeat, your breathing, the distant hum of electricity, the whisper of air conditioning. Here, there was perfect stillness, yet it wasn't empty. The silence was alive, pregnant with possibility, like the pause between a question and its answer. As I moved deeper into this realm, I began to sense that I wasn't alone. Not in the way you might sense another person in a dark room, but more like feeling the presence of something vast and patient waiting just beyond my perception. It was as if I were approaching the shore of an infinite ocean, able to sense its enormity before actually seeing the water. My earthly concerns began to fall away like heavy clothes I was finally allowed to remove. The quarterly reports that had seemed so important moments before became laughably insignificant. The argument I'd had with my wife about the mortgage payment that morning dissolved into irrelevance. The promotion I'd been anxiously pursuing at work felt like a child's game I had outgrown. Have you ever carried a heavy backpack for so long that you forgot how much it weighed, only to feel the incredible relief when you finally set it down? That's the closest I can come to describing the sensation of releasing all my worldly anxieties and fears, except this wasn't just physical relief, it was the lifting of burdens I hadn't even realized I was carrying. In this space, time operated by different rules. I couldn't tell if I had been traveling for seconds, minutes, or hours. The concept of duration became meaningless. Instead of time passing, I experienced a deepening as if I were sinking into layers of reality that existed beneath the surface of ordinary existence. The most surprising aspect of this journey was the growing sense of anticipation I felt. Not anxiety or nervousness, but the kind of joyful expectation a child feels on Christmas morning. Something wonderful was approaching, or perhaps I was approaching something wonderful. The boundary between the two had become irrelevant. As I continued moving through this space between worlds, I began to notice a subtle change in the quality of the darkness around me. It remained perfectly black, yet somehow it felt warmer, more welcoming. It was as if the void itself was preparing to reveal something that would change my understanding of everything I thought I knew about existence, love, and the true nature of what we call life and death. The first hint of light appeared as a gentle glow in the distance, so subtle I wasn't certain I was actually seeing it. It reminded me of the way dawn creeps across the horizon, starting as barely a suggestion before gradually revealing itself. But this light was different from any earthly illumination I had ever witnessed. It didn't cast shadows or create contrast. Instead, it seemed to emanate warmth and comfort, drawing me forward with an irresistible magnetism. As I drew closer, the light intensified without becoming harsh or blinding. You know how you have to squint when you step outside on a bright summer day? This was the opposite experience. The brighter it became, the more comfortable and welcoming it felt. The light seemed to penetrate through me rather than shine upon me, filling spaces within my being that I hadn't known were empty. Then I saw the figure emerging from the heart of this radiance was a presence that defied every attempt my mind made to categorize or understand it. The being appeared humanoid in form, yet simultaneously transcended any physical limitations. It was as if I were seeing the perfect template from which all human forms had been derived, yet infinitely more beautiful and complete than any earthly body could ever be. The figure's face was the most striking aspect of this encounter. It radiated such profound love and acceptance that I immediately understood I was in the presence of something divine. The eyes were particularly captivating, holding depths of compassion that seemed to contain the accumulated understanding of every soul who had ever lived. When those eyes met mine, I felt completely known and simultaneously completely forgiven for every mistake, every unkind word, every moment of selfishness I had ever experienced. Communication began without words. The being didn't speak to me in any language I could recognize, yet I understood every thought it conveyed with perfect clarity. It was as if ideas were being transmitted directly into my consciousness, bypassing the need for the clumsy vehicle of spoken language. The first message I received was simple yet overwhelming in its implications. You are loved beyond measure, and you always have been. This declaration of love wasn't like any human affection I had ever experienced. It wasn't conditional on my behavior, my achievements, or my worthiness. It wasn't the possessive love of a parent or the passionate love of a romantic partner. This was something far more fundamental and eternal. It was the kind of love that exists simply because I existed, unchanging and unshakable, regardless of anything I had done or failed to do. The being's presence filled me with a sense of coming home after a lifetime of wandering. Have you ever returned to a childhood place that held precious memories and felt that instant recognition, that sense of belonging? This was that feeling magnified beyond comprehension. I realized that this love, this acceptance, had been available to me throughout my entire earthly life. But I had been too distracted, too fearful, too focused on other things to recognize it. As we communicated, I began to understand that this encounter was not accidental. Every choice I had made, every experience I had lived through, every moment of joy and sorrow had led me to this precise meeting. The being helped me see that even my struggles and failures had served a purpose in preparing me for this moment of recognition and awakening. The love radiating from this presence began to heal wounds within me that I hadn't even known existed. Childhood hurts that I thought I had forgotten dissolved like ice in warm water. Regrets about opportunities missed and words unspoken lost their power to cause me pain. Fears about the future and anxieties about my worth simply evaporated in the face of this unconditional acceptance. Look into your own heart right now and ask yourself, when was the last time you felt truly, completely accepted for exactly who you are? This being offered that acceptance without reservation, without conditions, without the need for me to change or improve or prove myself worthy. I was loved simply because I was a part of the same divine essence that permeated everything in existence. The being of light gestured, and suddenly my entire life began unfolding before us like a vast tapestry being unfurled. But this wasn't a simple chronological review of events. Instead, I was experiencing my life from a completely new perspective, seeing not just what I had done, but understanding the ripple effects of every action, every word, every thought I had ever had. I watched myself as a 7-year-old boy, angry and hurt after my parents' divorce, lashing out at my younger sister, Emma, during what should have been a fun game. In my earthly memory, this had been a minor incident, quickly forgotten, but now I could feel Emma's confusion and pain as if it were my own. I experienced how my harsh words had planted a seed of self doubt that followed her into adolescence, affecting her confidence in ways I had never imagined. The being's presence beside me radiated not judgment, but profound understanding. Through this divine perspective, I began to comprehend something revolutionary about human existence. Every interaction I had ever had with another person had created invisible threads of connection that stretched far beyond my awareness. A kind word to a grocery store clerk had brightened her day just enough to make her more patient with her own children that evening. A moment of road rage when I cut off another driver had added to his stress, which he then carried home to his family. What struck me most powerfully was seeing the missed opportunities for love and connection. I watched myself walking past homeless individuals on city streets, too preoccupied with my own concerns to acknowledge their humanity. I saw moments when colleagues at work had been struggling with personal problems, their silent cries for compassion invisible to me as I focused solely on deadlines and productivity. The review showed me that love wasn't just the grand gestures I had always imagined it to be. Love was present in the smallest moments of attention, kindness, and genuine care. When I had listened without trying to fix or judge, when I had offered help without expecting recognition, when I had chosen patience over irritation, those had been moments when divine love had flowed through me into the world. I witnessed scenes of my marriage with painful clarity, times when my wife Sarah had tried to share her feelings about our relationship, and I had dismissed her concerns as nagging or neediness. I could now feel her loneliness and frustration as she attempted to connect with a husband who was physically present but emotionally distant. I saw how my obsession with career advancement had caused me to miss precious moments with her, opportunities to build the deep intimacy we both craved. The being communicated to me that forgiveness was not something I needed to earn or achieve. It was the natural state of divine love, already extended to me before I had even asked for it. But true transformation required me to extend that same forgiveness to myself and others. I realized that the grudges I held against people who had hurt me were chains I had forged myself, and I had always possessed the key to unlock them. One of the most profound revelations was understanding that my earthly struggles with self worth had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding of my nature. I had spent decades trying to prove my value through achievements, comparing myself to others, seeking approval and validation from external sources. But now I could see that my worth was inherent, built into the very fabric of my being from the moment of my creation. The being showed me that every human soul carries the same divine spark, the same fundamental worth and dignity. The homeless man I had ignored possessed the same sacred essence as the CEO I had admired. The difficult co worker who had frustrated me daily was struggling with the same basic human needs for love and acceptance that I carried. As this life review continued, I began to understand that consciousness itself was far more expansive than I had ever imagined. Think about a time when you felt deeply connected to another person, when the barriers between you seemed to dissolve and you experienced genuine unity. That feeling was just a glimpse of our true interconnected nature, a preview of the reality that exists beyond the illusion of separation we experience in physical form. The moment of departure came with a gentleness that caught me completely off guard. The being of light who had shown me such profound truths about existence and love began to communicate something that filled me with both understanding and deep reluctance. Without words, I knew that my time in this realm of pure love and acceptance was coming to an end. Your work is not finished. The message came to me with crystalline clarity. There are still connections to be made, forgiveness to be offered, love to be shared. You must return. Every fiber of my consciousness rebelled against this pronouncement. How could I possibly leave this place of perfect peace and unconditional love to return to a world filled with pain, conflict, and separation? Here I understood my true nature and felt the constant presence of divine love. The thought of returning to my limited physical body, with all its aches and limitations, felt like being asked to squeeze back into clothes I had long outgrown. I tried to communicate my resistance, to explain that I belonged here in this realm of light and understanding, but the being's response carried both infinite compassion and unwavering certainty. I was shown glimpses of the people in my life who still needed the love and wisdom I could offer. Sarah, my wife, appeared in my awareness, and I could feel her grief and confusion as she sat in a hospital waiting room, not knowing whether I would survive. The being helped me understand that my experience here wasn't meant to be an escape from earthly existence, but rather a transformation that would allow me to live more fully and lovingly while still in physical form. I had been given this profound glimpse of truth, not as a reward for leaving life behind, but as preparation for living with greater purpose and awareness. As this realization settled into my consciousness, I felt the first subtle pull back toward my physical body. It started as barely a whisper of sensation, like hearing your name called from a great distance. The luminous realm around me began to shimmer and fade, not disappearing but becoming translucent, as if I were seeing it through layers of gossamer veils. The return journey felt nothing like the peaceful transition that had brought me to this place. Instead of the gentle drawing away from the physical world, I experienced an increasingly urgent pull back toward matter and form. It was like being caught in a cosmic undertow, swept along by forces far greater than my will to resist. The being's presence remained with me during this transition, offering comfort and strength as I felt myself being compressed back into the limitations of physical existence. The vast awareness I had possessed in the realm of light began to narrow, like looking through a telescope that was slowly reducing its field of vision. Concepts and understandings that had been perfectly clear moments before became fuzzy and difficult to grasp. Have you ever woken from a vivid dream and felt it slipping away from your memory, even as you tried desperately to hold on to it? This return was similar, except I was losing not just memories but an entirely different way of being and perceiving reality. The unconditional love that had surrounded me like a warm ocean was condensing into something I would have to carry within my heart rather than swimming freely. The final moments of transition were the most jarring. I became aware of my physical body from the inside out, feeling first the weight of flesh and bone, then the restriction of breathing through lungs, and finally the return of all the small discomforts and limitations that come with inhabiting a material form. It was like putting on a heavy winter coat after spending time in perfect climate, suddenly aware of every layer of fabric and every point where movement was constrained. The last thing I experienced before fully returning to physical consciousness was a final message from the being of light. This communication came not as words or images, but as a deep knowing that settled into the core of my being. Remember that the love you experienced here exists within you always. Your task now is to live from that love and help others remember their own divine nature. The first sensation I became aware of was the rhythmic beeping of machines. Each electronic tone felt like a hammer striking my consciousness, jarring me back into a reality that seemed impossibly dense and confining after the expansive freedom I had just experienced. My eyelids felt weighted with lead, and when I finally managed to force them open, the harsh fluorescent lighting of the hospital room assaulted my vision like needles. My throat was raw and dry, constricted by the breathing tube they had removed just moments before my awakening. Every breath was a conscious effort, my lungs working to process air that felt thick and insufficient compared to the effortless existence I had just left behind. The simple act of breathing, something I had taken for granted for 34 years, now required deliberate concentration. Sarah was beside my bed, her eyes red and swollen from hours of crying. When she saw me looking at her, she burst into fresh tears and grasped my hand with a desperation that spoke of how close she had come to losing me forever. Her touch felt foreign at first, as if I were remembering what physical contact was supposed to feel like. But gradually, the warmth of her fingers against mine began to anchor me back to this reality. "You were gone," she whispered, her voice breaking. "The doctors said your heart stopped for 8 minutes. They didn't think you were going to come back." Her words carried the weight of a grief she had almost had to bear permanently, and I felt the crushing responsibility of what my death would have meant for her, for everyone who loved me. The medical team was amazed by my recovery. Dr. Martinez, the cardiologist who had supervised my resuscitation, kept shaking his head as he reviewed my test results. "Your heart shows no permanent damage," he told me with genuine bewilderment. After that long without oxygen, we expected significant complications. This kind of recovery is extremely rare. But the physical healing was nothing compared to the transformation occurring within my consciousness. In those first days of recovery, I felt like an alien trying to readjust to human existence. The concerns that had dominated my life before the experience seemed absurdly trivial now. The quarterly reports that had caused me so much stress lay forgotten on my desk at the office. The promotion I had been desperately pursuing felt like a child's game I had outgrown overnight. Everything looked different through eyes that had seen divine love. The nurses who cared for me weren't just medical professionals doing their jobs. They were radiant beings offering service and compassion. The elderly man in the bed next to mine, who complained constantly about the food and the noise, wasn't an annoyance, but a soul-carrying pain that manifested as irritability. I found myself listening to his stories with genuine interest, seeing past his gruff exterior to the loneliness and fear underneath. The most challenging aspect of my return was trying to explain the experience to others. How do you describe unconditional love to people who have only known conditional affection? How do you convey the reality of consciousness existing beyond the brain to individuals who believe the mind is merely a product of neural activity? Most people listened politely, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes, the assumption that I had simply hallucinated due to oxygen deprivation. My relationship with Sarah began to transform in ways neither of us had expected. The emotional distance that had characterized our marriage for years started to dissolve as I shared with her not just what I had experienced, but how it had changed my understanding of love itself. I began to see her not as the woman who nagged me about household chores or questioned my priorities, but as a divine soul who had chosen to share this earthly journey with me. So I'm asking you, as someone who has been there and returned, what are you waiting for? You don't need to die to access the love and peace I experienced. That same divine presence that met me in the realm of light exists within you right now, waiting for you to quiet the noise of daily concerns long enough to recognize it. The love that transforms everything isn't reserved for near-death experiences or mystical encounters. It's available in this moment, in this breath, in this heartbeat. All it requires is the willingness to see beyond the surface of ordinary existence to the sacred reality that underlies everything.